if you look at 90% of the best work at a large scale that will happen in our country will be under the framework of some developer.
What does the terrain in the future look like?
The amount of construction that we're doing as a country, the numbers are staggering. We are at an all-time high, but now
in a large format scale like this, how do you ensure that creativity is coming out? And because everything is time bound, everything is process oriented.
What we've achieved as Edifice as a company, the reason we're able to scale up to the extent that we are is because
you have spent 5-6 years keeping somebody, upskilling them. A new firm comes, offers them a better job with a better salary.
That just happens. Look, we live in a capitalist world here.
In a corporate firm like this, what's the career path I have and what are the chances of me becoming the CEO and getting a seat on the board?
In today's world, we're so fascinated with being leaders in our own right that we all want to be entrepreneurs. But what I would actually tell people is that, there is such a thing as intrapreneurship as well. The best example I can give you is Sundar Pichai.
Why are Indian firms not being spoken about and put out there and made more aware of the work that we're doing?
The architecture landscape in India today is made up of broadly 3 categories of firms.
AI definitely is taking over. How much of this do you see AI doing it in architectural firms?
I think there's a lot of hoo-ha about AI, right? And
Creative Sparkplug is a black book of creative journeys. In this podcast, we speak with creative individuals and record their stories. It gives insight into creative lives. It inspires youngsters. And it nourishes the ones who are feeling challenged. So today we are speaking with architect Siddhartha Rao.
So Siddharth, where did you grow up and why architecture? I think we'll start with the basic question.
Awesome.
And then move on from there.
So why architecture is a very difficult question. It's the first question that they ask you when you enter college. And your second year seniors come to start ragging you and then they ask you, architecture kyun liya? And more often than not, we all come up with this weird contorted answer because each one wants to be different from the other because somebody's already stolen the answer that you had in your head. And I think the most common answer there is...
I hated maths.
No, for me, it was not that one. For me, it was, I love science, I love art, and I wanted to do something that had both in it. So I think I'm going to, 20-something years, 25 years down the line, I'm going to tell you that I think that was pretty much the same reason why I took up architecture. But I think I realized very late through my, towards the end of my school life, I kind of realized that, this whole grunt work of studying for large exams, remembering complicated big formulas and things like that, while I was always an engineering buff, I realized that just wasn't the thing for me. And I wanted to do something where I felt like there was this thing of instant gratification where in architecture, when you sketch something or you draw something, you literally see something come up in front of you. So I spoke to a bunch of architects, Arun
one of them
happens to be one of your podcast guests as well. So he was actually the first guy Arun Swaminathan was the first architect that I ever spoke to who actually gave me a glimpse of what it was like to, be an architect. And he kind of told me what his projects are like and what kind of work he does. And then, of course, the journey to how he became one. And that kind of started making sense. Because you realize that, there's a lot of you in the work that you do. We put ourselves into it. That sounded like fun. There was a creative side to it. And I was always a very right-brained kid. So for me, it just sort of played into the whole scheme of things very easily. And then come the end of 12th standard, I turned around and told my parents, "Mujhe engineering nahi karna." And they, of course, I think mom was still okay, but my dad actually thought I was escaping things. So it took him a while to wrap his head around it, but eventually he came around and then I went and did my architecture at Manipal.
One of the best colleges at that time.
I still think it's one of the best colleges. In fact, I think they've gotten better now than they were when we were young. But 5 of my best years, I think, as far as education is concerned, I wouldn't redo that in any other way. I thought those 5 years in Manipal were probably the best I've ever had. Met some great people, my wife included. Some, made
वहाँ पे कहानी है.
So for me, college was a combination of architecture, music, theater, sports. It was like a whole bunch of things, and then and all of them were taken up quite seriously. And towards the end of it, I think I realized that architecture was the way to, way to go, and I stuck to it.
And what in music did you?
So I was in a band.
Okay.
And so we started out as a very simple amateur band. And someone figured out that I could sing, so we kind of and somebody else played the guitar. Somebody else said, okay, I play the guitar, but I'll also play the bass if you guys are looking for a bassist. And then we found a drummer, and then we literally just pulled a bunch of guys together. And then of course, what happens is that the first time you play together is the worst thing that can ever happen to you. So we did 2 or 3 lousy shows, and then we realized that you can't just get together and start playing. You have to practice, and you have to earn that, that thing to play well, and you have to work your way into it. So then we started taking it a little more seriously, and then by the end of college, we actually got really good. We took part in all these South Zone competitions, and we were one of the best bands in the South for a long time. We recorded a mini EP. We did all of that, and then of course post college we kind of one or two of the guys decided to take music very seriously. One of them he's become one of the poster boys for Indian heavy metal. So and I'll talk about that separately. The rest of us kind of just figured that we didn't want to risk the artistic lifestyle, so we decided to stick to our respective careers, whether it was engineering or architecture, and then take that ahead. So while that happened, there was theater on the side, which was also another distraction, which I did a lot of, because theater is something that I continued doing even after I came back into Bangalore. So I graduated from college in 2008, came back to Bangalore, and while I started my career here, I was part-time. I had a theater group in college that moved with me to Bangalore. So we all got together, and we actually did a whole bunch of shows in Rangashankara, a couple of shows in Jagrati, Aliyas. In those days, it was just Rangashankara and Aliyas.
These
And
three
back
were
in
the
day,
most happening.
yeah, Jagrati came much later, but I think it was Rangashankara and Alliance. And then, of course, as we all started growing, a few members of that group also decided to go pro in theater. And then the rest of us decided that we can't go pro. Or we had a choice, but I chose to stick to architecture. So architecture is one. So it was first architecture versus engineering, then it was architecture versus music, and then it was architecture versus theater. And then somehow architecture stuck, and it has gotten me through.
I think
those
architecture
years.
does that. We also, like during college, music and a lot of other things were picked up as a hobby, and I myself went through that journey. And I think a lot of other architects whom we've spoken to as well have told us about their multiple interests in music and a lot of other things. So I think architecture generally does that to us.
Yeah, and I think it's also, unlike a lot of other professions, because architecture or any design-related profession has this element of creativity in it, right? So there's, unlike other jobs where you're doing something extremely mechanical, and so therefore you need something creative to kind of vent out and take out that pent-up energy, right? And just put it into something else, and just help you find that balance. So for a lot of people, it's sport. For a lot of people, it's music, theater, or some art form, right? Some people like to paint. Architecture allows you to do all of that in your profession. Of course, there are other downsides to it, right? So when your creative side is your professional side, then what's left, right? Then you still need an alternative, right? So music and theater are a great way to they're a great way to find that balance, irrespective of the kind of work that you're doing. But they also teach you some wonderful things. Like I think the best example of teamwork comes out of theater. So theater teaches you that when you're on stage, the script is king, right?
Okay.
There's a director who has decided that this is how he wants things to play out. As an actor, you have to read out your lines. You have to learn your lines. You have to be disciplined and make sure you know your part. You know exactly how you're moving around. But you also need to know what your relationship with your co-characters is on stage. And so at any point in time, there is a focus, there is a middle ground, and then there is a background. And you need to understand where you stand in that scene at that point in time. Especially in my earlier years, when I first started getting into theater and I was learning from, people who are more experienced, I would realize that, we have certain scenes where something's going on in one corner of the stage and something else is going on the left-hand side, where someone is doing something a little out of character, and you realize that your attention as an audience is going from right to left because when it should be on the right, but you're getting distracted by what's happening on the left. And why is that happening? Because someone's not playing their part correctly. Right? So what happens as a result of that, what's happening eventually is that the story is being told in a manner which is not true to itself or not true to the director's vision, which means that the story is not getting told very well. So that line gets missed. So later on, when someone circles back to that particular line later in the story, you've missed it because somewhere something, and it's a very small domino effect that happens, but it's a part of what being on stage is all about, right? So theater teaches you that. It teaches you to know your role, and it teaches you when to speak, when not to speak, when to shut up, right? It's so important, and when to pause. What do you emphasize on? So a lot of what I think we do in architecture today, and a lot of my seniors, even at work today, we talk about how architecture has a lot of storytelling, right? A lot of what we do in architecture, there is a lot of storytelling that we do in architecture, and it doesn't mean that we keep telling stories, but what it means is that a lot of our work involves stitching a whole series of events and putting it in a chronological order and then relaying it to someone so that they understand either a process or a concept or even something as simple as the timelines of your project, right? And then a lot of that needs you to emphasize on the right thing at the right time. Okay, sometimes when you're talking to a client and you want them to you're telling them about something that has happened, or it's just a presentation, you're presenting a design to them. You can just vomit out pretty much everything you know about it, or you can sequence your speech in a certain way so that you narrate your concept in the form of a story, right? The story doesn't need to have a character going from beginning to end. It could just be a sequence of spaces that you're narrating them through, right? But because you're taking them on a journey, and because you are, emphasizing on the right point at the right time, they are able to understand what you're saying, and they're able to get the true gist of what you are talking about. So that's very important, right? And some people are just natural, right? A lot of architects just have that flair where you're standing in front of a client, you have this massive screen in front of you, and you're able to talk your way through. But for a lot of people, it's I think it's all these alternative experiences that really teach you the importance of it. So for me, I owe a lot of what I am professionally to my experiences through music or even through theater. Music also teaches you a lot of things. Being in a band teaches you so much. So I was a singer, didn't play any other instrument, didn't have any other talent. But because I was a singer, I was the guy who had to go stand right in the front and lead the band. So, talking to a crowd of, say, 5,000 people, right? And then trying to get their affection and trying to, win them over just by talking while your drummer's still kicking on the kick drum
and all of that.
and, trying to sort of speak things out. The band is just sort of getting their, they're plugging in and they're sort of getting stuff together. And all you have to do is, you're like the stand-up comedian who's come in for a, for a filler event. Right. So you're standing there and you're talking about, something absolutely random. You're making fun of one of your bandmates. You're just trying to, rile up the crowd because, you're going to play some really heavy music after this. And so we used to do that. We used to play a lot of heavy, metal back in the days.
At what time did you meet his wife? Because I want to know what happened behind the scenes in bands. Like heavy metal band was. That to Seaside. And that to Manipal.
So I was the
Intoxication is a different issue. I want to take that off.
Intoxication was never a problem because I hardly got intoxicated. But the problem was, and I think that was part of the problem of the image that I had made for myself.
So you're the lead singer of a heavy metal band.
But the irony of all that was I once had someone come and tell me ki, Sid, you're on stage, you're singing Pantera. Okay, you're singing Cowboys from Hell. साला ब्लैक शर्ट और शूज तो पहन ले यार, तू तो मतलब ऐसे शर्ट पहन के खाकी ट्राउजर्स पहन के तू पहुंच गया So, I mean, how are you singing heavy metal, boss?
right,
And
so
then, so I had to, and that's when I realized that, and I just thought I was wearing some good clothes and singing on
If you
stage.
would have told me you were into classical singing and all, I would have agreed. But heavy metal, did you have long hair and all that?
I did. For a short while, I had long hair, I had a goatee, I wanted to be like James Hetfield. I had that whole, so there was that. So there was finally, जब लड़की पटाने की बारी आई, तो फिर then I had to clean up and I had to, cut my hair and all that. So I think there's an old video of one of these shows where I'm wearing a white t-shirt and I'm wearing this light blue shirt open, right? And I'm wearing khaki trousers and leather chappals,
Nice.
singing Cowboys from Hell. Okay, and the rest of the band looks like they're a bunch of ruffians playing hardcore heavy metal. My drummer was without a shirt, so then all that jazz is going on, and I'm growling on stage, but I'm wearing good boy clothes. so so there's
Mama's boy फिसल गया, हाथ से निकल गया types.
Your wife is from architecture?
yeah. So she Anjum was my classmate from college. And so we started dating in 2006, and then we eventually, you know, we so she's a Punjabi from Calcutta. So post college I went back to Bangalore. She went back to Calcutta.
Punjabi from Calcutta, as in a Sardar?
No, she's not. She's not. She's just she's not a Sardar. And so yeah, and then so we kind of, for a few years, we kind of had to go separate ways because we were in two different cities and all that. And then eventually in 2012, we got married.
And you passed out from Manipal which year?
2008.
So how long did this, after you came out of college, how long did the theatre thing last?
For 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah. Theatre lasted for 5 years. And so that's when it really started getting serious. So what happened was that, so the group was called Dramanon, Dramatists Anonymous. And it was started by one of our college professors, a dear friend of mine who now practices and runs his firm in Hyderabad and runs the same theatre space in Hyderabad, right? So Dramanon started in Manipal. So coming down to Dramanon, we started, a few of my seniors kind of graduated and came to Bangalore in 2006. And so they started the Bangalore chapter here. But back then we were all just, doing something because we all had our day jobs and we wanted to just do something creative and we wanted to, we needed an outlet. So for me, while architecture was great and I was, doing some of my best work, for me, theatre was a place where I could go and scream my lungs out and, laugh at myself, let it out completely. So there was that, right? And then you really learn a thing or two in the process. You learn a lot of things.
What was your early work life like?
I graduated from college and I started working at Total Environment.
Straight out of college?
Straight out of college. There was a campus hire that happened. And so they came, like every other campus recruitment process that happens. They came to college and they, interviewed a whole 30 of us. There was a test. And then we had to present our portfolios. And so out of, I think 33 of us got hired. And like that, there were three people from other colleges that got hired as well. And usually, these guys would go to, the best colleges. They were very clear that they wanted to go to, the cream of the crowd and make sure that they got the best of us. So when I joined Total Environment, it was like a lovely batch of, some 20 new grads or some 50 new graduates from both architecture and in the engineering faculties. And I think it was, while I can't maybe reveal so much anymore because I'm still, I don't work there anymore. I was there for 10 years. I started my career there, worked there for 10 years. I think it is it has to be the best upbringing that anyone can get as an architect. And I could be saying this because I think I got lucky, right? I had the right boss at the right project at the right time. A lot of things sort of fell in place for me. So I got to start a project as soon as I joined. And then eventually I kind of, as I grew in the company, I kind of grew in my status as a part of that project as well. And then eventually started leading the project, right? And by the time the project was done, I was the project architect for it because it took a few years. It just so happened that we were also going through a recession. 2008 was when Lehman Brothers crashed, and then that just turned the real estate world upside down. And I think that kind of taught us all a lot of things because we weren't just learning architecture. The fact that we were working in a company like Total Environment under Kamal, you also learned what it was like to be a developer. You also learned what it was like to be a contractor in terms of, building things. Okay, so it wasn't just enough that you made this cool little concept that you could flourish around. And while most places were, going through this whole danger of shutting down, and kind of a lot of doors were closed during that recession period, right? I think somehow the leadership at that time sort of figured things out and make sure that our the lights were always on, and we were always working on towards something. But what it also did was that things that we had to do in 6 months, we suddenly had a little bit of elbow room to do it in a year, because the market demand had slumped. So I had the opportunity, especially for my project, to really sit down and detail it out, in the best possible way. And I had a great mentor who actually runs his own practice now, by the name of Vishal at that time. And so he helped me he taught me how to structure out a project, right? What's the first thing that you do? Right? Well, now you've made the concept. How do you take it to a schematic design stage? How do you take it to a detailed design stage? How do you work on your GFCs? And so and when you are working on large scale projects, you can't just work on all of it yourself. You have to understand that there will be multiple people involved. So how do you tie multiple people in together so that each of them owns a small part of it, and then stitches it together and then makes a larger product come to life, right? So that was something we learned. And then the 2008, 9, 10, I think it was 3 years, because of the slowdown and because of what it was, I got the ample opportunity to really sit down and sink my teeth into things, and really get down to a nut bolt level. So my first project was this lovely tower that we did, which had about 72 homes and 2 penthouses on the top. And the team of us who worked on it worked on the entire tower, the master planning for it, and then we also customized each of the homes inside that tower. So for us, it was an equivalent of doing 1 plus 74 projects, right? And at the same time, while I was talking to other kids my age at that point in time, I would ask them, saying, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm working on 3 different projects here, and somebody else is working on 5 different projects there." And the one inconsistency that I saw in all of them was that each of them was working, or rather, the consistency in their stories, which was inconsistent with me, was that they were all working on multiple things, but they weren't really owning one thing, right? Whereas I got the opportunity to really work on one project, work on it to my heart's content, because when I walked out of that project, when we finished it, the skills that I had developed allowed me to do 3 more in the same amount of time the next 3 years, right? Or the next 6 years, whatever you want to call it, right? And that really sort of helped me springboard from one designation to another. And then that's how you kind of start growing. So by year 9, I was in, they called me into the leadership. So I was one of the youngest leaders in the company at that point in time. There were others. I mean, there were others who were probably 1 or 2 years younger than me as well. But there was a whole breed of us who managed to do really well at that time. And then, so, we were the 29, 30-year-old leaders who were sitting there, amongst a group of 40 and 50-year-olds, right? And it's a great feeling to be a part of that. And by the time I left, I think if someone asked me what are the big highlights of what you learned out of that, one was, of course, like I said, architecture in its core sense, right? How do you design a building? How do you, what all do you need to think of? How do you deal with a structural?
Applying everything that you learned.
Everything, and how do you deal with a structural engineer? How do you deal with with other co-consultants, MEP, structures, facade, whatever it is? How do you deal with all of these other faculties and then put this beautiful product together, right? So that's the first thing that you learn. The second big thing that you learn is, what is it like to be a developer? And let me tell you,
you were talking about this, right?
Yes.
Because he's an architect. They get known as an architect, but they're actually developers.
They're actually developers. And the developer business is one of the most difficult businesses in this country, right? And one of the things that I think we will talk about later is where we're headed as a country, and I'll tell you why the developers are so important. Because if you look at 90% of the best work at a large scale that will happen in our country will be under the framework of some developer, because of and I'll elaborate on this statement much later. But that's the glamorous side of it. That's the side that everybody sees as a consumer, right? But it's an extremely difficult journey. And this is where I really tip my hat to Kamal, because, as an architect, you tend to stay away from it. And I know that as an architect today, I will not become a developer. That's the last thing I want to do, because it's just too tedious, right? And it takes a lot of your brain space. So it was only later when I actually started running a company where I started realizing that, boss, what Kamal has achieved as an individual is remarkable, right? To be an architect, to be a developer, to run a construction company, next level. But the reason I also say this is because being a developer is also about being able to manage various kinds of people. Okay. A lot of times you have to invest first before you see the result. So now let's talk from a business point of view, right?
I'm paying somebody a lot of money to understand this. Go for it.
So the whole point of being a developer is that or rather one of the key things that you will learn as a developer is that you have to find ways to invest into either a property or into the construction of your first project well before you even start receiving the money for it. And
so then it'll constantly require
so it requires, so cash flows are very important. Right. And eventually you realize that, I mean, this is something that I learned. It wasn't just for, cash flows wasn't just important from a developer point of view. You also need to, I think, as a company, any company that runs, what we're not told enough about is the importance of cash flows. Right. I mean, finally, money has to come from somewhere and then go into somebody else's bank account in some form or the other, either as salaries or as payments. So that is something that we learned really well. I learned as an architect, you when you're working in a developer firm, you learn about what a procurement team does. You learn about what a project management team does.
They have systems in place.
They have systems in place. They have processes in place, right? And this is something that I couldn't have learned if I had gone and worked in a smaller firm. Right? So 2018, I moved into Edifice. And I'll tell you why Edifice happened, because with Edifice, we were in a conversation where we wanted to do something different. The first thing that happened was that I left TE to join Edifice in Bangalore, actually to do the role that I'm currently doing.
Right.
And while I was doing that, and I did that role for a year. So while I was doing that, we created a second company from within Edifice. So a group of us got together and we created a separate, a small little startup called Denkali.
There is the Denkali. Okay. While you were working there as well, and the principal architect or the owner didn't have a problem with it.
No, it was a initiative by the owners of Edifice.
Oh, nice.
So it was a startup from within Edifice, and it was within the Edifice group of companies. And the idea was that so the first year while I was here in Bangalore, I ran the region here for about a year, ran operations for them here, and in that time we worked on setting up the company. And then 2019 I moved to Mumbai to actually sit down and kick that company off completely. Kickstarted from an operational point of view, from a project's point of view.
So the company that you're working for right now, Edifice, is fairly new, not as old as...
No. Edifice is very old.
It's an old company. Edifice must be about a 25, 30-year-old company.
Edifice is, so we just turned 36.
Okay. So, Siddharth, what I wanted to ask you is, close to 10 years you worked with Total Environment, and most of your batchmates or contemporaries were working with boutique firms. What, as somebody who's worked in a large format firm versus people who had been working in the smaller boutique kind of setups, what was your understanding or your takeaway, or what do you think was your advantage that you had over other people who were working in the smaller boutique kind of setup?
Okay. So for that, we'll have to understand what are the different kinds of firms that actually exist, right? And that's just to give it context so that we can have a more detailed conversation. So India today is made up of, or the architecture landscape in India today is made up of broadly 3 categories of firms. The first kind is the typical architecture firm that you hear about when you graduate from college, or even what you are told about when you're in school or college, right? These are typically mom and pop shops, or rather small boutique firms that have anything between 5, 10, maybe even all the way up to 25 to 30 people, right? the kind of projects that they work on, because of the size and because of how the market kind of responds to them, most of them end up working on projects which are somewhere between independent homes to larger luxury homes to, a scale which is somewhere akin to, say, a luxury clubhouse maybe, right? A lot of them work on very high-end boutique luxury restaurants, luxury homes. And you'll see the word luxury come up again and again. I'm using that very sort of specifically because these firms are able to do a lot of detailed work at a small scale. So their work is smaller in size, but it's extremely detailed, right? And it's extremely bespoke. So if you're doing a house in one of the more expensive gated communities in Bangalore, you're probably going to your plot size will be somewhere around 100 by 100. Okay. So on a 10,000 square feet plot, you're going to be designing a house something close to anything between 6,000 square feet to 8,000 square feet, maybe even 10,000 plus square feet, right? That means you're designing for someone who's extremely well off and can afford a lot more. And that also comes with the fact that their exposure is a lot more. They've seen the world. Clients today are highly exposed. So these kind of firms actually work for such homes, and they're able to deliver beautiful homes which are highly detailed. Okay, so that's one particular kind of firm. But what you'll always see consistently is that they're all in a certain scale. They don't go beyond a certain scale because it's very difficult to follow the methods that they use to go about designing these homes. Very difficult to do that in a larger premise. The second category is somewhat like a hybrid category because usually what happens is that this small firm eventually grows into the second category, right? Which is somewhere between 50 people to 100 people. You're doing roughly about close to about maybe 15 to 20 crores a year in revenue, right? Just to give you a ballpark in terms of companies.
That's the turnover you're talking about.
Turnover. And I'm talking about just design fees. Okay. I'm not talking about whether they get into design and build and all. That's
This is
different.
not about the value of the projects that they're handling.
No. This is to do with this is the if I had to just look at design fees as an order book, right? So they would all be somewhere there. The turnover that they will get is anything between 15 to 20 crores a year. The smaller ones will probably stop at maybe 10 crores. Some will be as low as maybe 1 to 2 crores. Some maybe even go all the way up to about 10 crores. Every firm is different. This is not a standard formula, but this is a broad level range that you'll get at, right? And then you have the second one. The second one is more into the second category of firms will their projects are more like apartment buildings, slightly medium sized developments, lots of schools, lots of different kinds of medium to large scale projects that are coming up. And then there is the third category, right? Which is where the number of people will be anything beyond, say, 90 to as high as maybe 400 people, right? And when you have a firm that large, the reason you have that is because you have multiple different kinds of capabilities that you have hired and put into under one roof. And the kind of projects that you're dealing with are extremely large scale. So we're talking about projects which are upwards of 1 million square feet at a time. Right? You have campuses today which are about close to about 25 lakh square feet. That's 2.5 million square feet. Okay. You have projects in India which are sitting at close to about 50 lakh to almost a crore of square feet. Right? One project. So these larger firms have that ability. And we're talking about large scale developments. If you look at, so airports usually come with this kind of a scale. Right? So the nature of the project also needs to be understood. Most of these projects are usually large scale mixed use developments where a single project is a cluster of several small projects coming together.
Something like a brigade gateway.
Something like a brigade gateway, right? So where you have a shopping mall at one end, you've got you've got the World Trade Center, and then you've got the massive residential building
and a 5-star hotel.
And a 5-star hotel. So you've got that's the perfect example of a mixed use project, because in fact in Bangalore it's probably one of the first large scale mixed use projects that came about, right? And invariably it's usually a developer that's bringing it all together, right? Which is of course another point that we'll talk about. And so these firms are built to handle this kind of scale. They are not built to handle the single home or the smaller projects, because eventually what happens is it becomes counterproductive for them to do so. Not because they're not capable of doing it or anything like that, but because they are built larger, their cost structures are larger. Okay, they spend more on their infrastructure, they spend more on their space, on their people, on their talent. They have senior people. Smaller firms tend to have people aging out. So if you look at any boutique practice today, you will be surprised if you find someone who's been working with them for 20 years. Why? Because the simplest reason is because when you start out today in architecture, you will earn something close to about the lowest that you will earn today is about 15,000. If you're depending on the kind of firm that you're working, you will start with either maybe 20,000 or 30,000 rupees a month. That's the broad level starting salary that you see today in architecture. Now, as you grow older, you're going to be, your increments are usually, on an average, you're seeing anything between 8 to 10%, depending on how that firm is growing, right? Now, how long will it take for that person to hit a point where his or her salary becomes unaffordable to that firm, because the firm is only bringing in so much of money. Yes, with inflation, that money does get bigger. But if you're going to work on certain scales of projects, you will be limited to a certain pool of money that is there. And then, of course, most proprietary-led firms also, it's a family business, if you look at it in many ways, right? So there is a limitation to how much they can afford in terms of salaries, which is why most of the smaller firms, and if you talk to anyone, you'll realize that, people come to a senior designer level, which is about somewhere between 5 to 7 years of experience. And then they may have another designation like an associate architect, which is going up to maybe 10 years, right? But beyond that, those guys age out. And they invariably leave to start their own practice, which is a very similar natured practice to what they have grown up in, because that's the kind of work that they know. Or they leave to go and join maybe one of these larger practices that, where they see further growth, right? So I come under the category of people who went from one firm to another firm because I saw growth in the way I was doing. I didn't age out and start my own practice. But for a lot of people, that is a reality. So working in a small firm so to answer your question, how this started, working in a small firm is great because you get to see a lot more in a very short span of time. When you're running a practice of say 10 people or 20 people, because you are limited by the number of people, you are everything from, as a junior architect, you do everything from being the office boy to being the guy who delivers drawings to actually sitting and working on an entire project detail by detail, right? Obviously, you're not going to be able to call the shots because, there are, a few layers above you who will get into the design of things. But you get to learn from them, and eventually you very quickly graduate to a point where you can own an entire house. So while the principal architect is still watching over you and making sure that the client is happy and the project is going well, you as an individual are given the task of managing this entire project end to end, and you're probably given a few junior resources, an intern, a junior architect, and that's typically the structure that works, right? The same thing changes dramatically the moment you go into the medium-sized firm or the large-scale firm, right? That's not all. The other thing that changes is the manner in which smaller firms work for a boutique project versus how a large-scale practice works for larger-scale projects, right? The format of the work is different. So today, I can tell you that for a project in edifice, for example, if you're doing something if you're doing a campus which is somewhere around like 20, 25 lakh square feet, you can't work in a piecemeal manner, right? Projects are structured. There are a lot more entities that are involved in the way a project has to be put together, right? So you're not alone as an architect. You're not the only person who calls the shots on how a project needs to progress, right? Whereas in a smaller firm, in a smaller practice, the architect is literally the be-all, end-all of the project, and everybody else is just an add-on that is brought through at the architect's discretion. Whereas in a larger scale project, the stakes are much higher. So you have a PMC, you have your client, you have a PMC, you have the architecture firm or the interior design firm that's working. You have other consultants that are involved. Sometimes they're appointed by the client, sometimes they're put under the umbrella of a single practice where the architecture firm, the principal architect kind of loops everyone together under one umbrella and then manages it. But regardless, there's a clear demarcation as to who's designing, who's handling project management, and then eventually there is a separate team that is managing execution. So while the architects are always going to be involved right from start to finish, there is a much larger system. There are processes in place that help you manage this entire gambit of projects. That is missing in the smaller firms. Also because the smaller the project, the priority with which money is spent is different, right? So if you're going to build a 10,000 square feet house, your entire money is going to go into the beautiful details that the house is going to come in. You're not going to be willing to spend on a project manager. You're not going to be willing to spend on. You're not going to get an L&T to come and build your house. You're going to use a contractor who's more in tune with your personalized needs, will come and pay attention to the kind of thing. And therefore, the way the design process happens is also very organic. So a lot of the times there's a concept that's done, and then it very quickly goes into execution while the project is still being designed. So there's a basic shell and sort of structure that gets put in place. So they said, "Chalo, we'll bring the contractor, we'll get the structure started. Utne mein hum log apna interior detail karte rahenge." In large scale projects, you can't do that. You have to make your entire work scalable. So larger firms work with the idea of making their work scalable. So these are two fundamental differences between a small practice and a large practice.
So large scale, at least in Bangalore context, we have Venkatraman, we have RSP, we have Edifice, we have Total Environment, but Total Environment has a very different.
They're a developer, so they're a different company. Yeah.
So these are large scale formats, but what comes under a mid-size and a small in a popular name that is there?
So I think maybe like a Khosla Associates, right? They will be somewhere between a small and medium-sized firm because they prolific work, but you will very rarely see them go and take on a 1 million square feet office campus. Right? You'll never. That's not their forte, and they will not take it up. They're really good at what they do, so they're a great example of someone. And I think I don't think it's fair to call them a small firm because the sheer value of the work that they do is probably has risen over the years. But I think that they're a good example of someone who's grown from being a small to a medium firm.
Would it be fair enough to say firms like 100 Hands, Inform Architects,
these guys,
Khosla as a mid-size?
I think they would qualify as a mid-size simply because I think they've also risen in terms of both revenue, in terms of the kind of work that they're doing. You see, you also have to look at how the kind of projects that you take up when you're starting up. One of the reasons why you also take on smaller scale projects is because not many people will trust you with their work. These firms, the ones that you just mentioned, they don't have that problem anymore, right? They are established. They've been around for 20 years. They're extremely good at the work that they do. So for them, they already have a list of clients in waiting who are waiting to get them to start their work, right? And usually that happens when you've been around the block for a certain amount of time, and you've grown to a point where you can actually command a certain fee. You can command a certain a certain presence in your projects, where you're able to tell the person saying, look, this is how we work, this is how we design, and if you're okay with that, we would like to, we'd like to move ahead with this project in this manner, right? They have a method by which they're able to, make sure that they design their projects exactly the way they want for it to be. The smaller firms, you think of any of the younger firms that you probably
startup,
see.
Anybody
like any of the
from any of these mid-size.
Yeah. So if I had to put another number to it, I would probably put age as a number, right? So the smaller category of firms would probably be firms which are somewhere between the 0 to 10 years of age.
As a starting.
Because it takes you that long to it takes you at least 10 years to go and cement your reputation as a firm where people are just waiting to work with you, right? And it takes that while, because when you start your own firm, you don't get the projects that you want all the time. I mean, sure, you will have some, family friend or some uncle who's willing to,
mostly through references. And
but you have some relative who's willing to, give you his farmhouse or some, one small. Sometimes it's even smaller. It's a small bedroom maybe, right? So it starts with things like that, where you sort of organically grow into something, and because there's this chaos that you're sort of growing through, you don't have a lot of systems in place. Some firms don't even have, they probably have just one accountant, who's just counting the money that's coming to the firm and making sure that salaries are getting paid and things like that. But the system of HR doesn't exist. You don't have a finance team. You don't. The idea of operations is non-existent, right? So these are I mean, those are certain realities that the smaller firm does. By the time you get to the 10-year age, that is where, between 10, 20, and then beyond that, you kind of graduate not just from, in terms of reputation, but you also graduate, you start doing larger projects because a lot of people are willing to trust you with larger projects now. Right? Because they suddenly know that you've got 10 years of worth of a, lovely portfolio, which they are willing to give you. They know that you've done 20, 30 odd restaurants already. You've done some 50 odd homes in the last 10 years. So now they're willing to give you the bigger, better chunk of projects, which you are now ready for. Right. And that's typically how it happens.
My take on this, I mean, the whatever classification that you did so far is absolutely bang on. But at the mid-size level, what happens generally is they have a brilliant identity in terms of the kind of work that they do. So X is very different from Y and Y is very different from Z. For example, Khosla's work is very, very, I mean, all of these names that we gave for a mid-size firm, they have very distinct style of work. And somebody goes to them for that particular style. If I like the style, I go to them. But in a large firm, in an Indian context, one of the, the unique nature that you have as an architect is you have worked in large format firms. These large format firms are homegrown. They're not international brands.
Yeah.
So we have had guests with whom we have done podcasts, and they have mostly worked in international firms.
Right.
So like Shaju, my senior, he's worked with Zaha Hadid, he's worked with DP Architects. He has worked with Morphogenesis as well, the only Indian homegrown brand as an architecture firm, large scale. And then now he's with Gensler. So as an international firm, even 200, 250 is a mid-size scale for brands like Gehry, Zaha Hadid, where there are 200-300 people.
Because they deliberately limit themselves to a certain size.
Yeah, and at that scale, in India we call it a large firm, but they are a mid-size firm in outside India.
Correct.
A little over mid-size.
Okay. So let me just translate the same differentiation to how it works internationally, right? You do get smaller firms in internationally. Across the globe, you have the same kind of small firms that I described over here. You have a lot of them. Sri Lanka has a lovely range of these beautiful small firms. There are a lot of them coming out of South Africa. Denmark has some extremely beautiful firms. And of course, the US and Australia. I mean, these are, and Singapore, right? These are countries where you have all three of these categories. Amongst the ones that you mentioned, you're right. So Gehry, Zaha Hadid, internationally, they would all probably be considered as a mid-size firm. If you really want to compare a large-size firm in India with another large-size firm abroad, I would think SOM, HOK,
Fox and Fowler.
Foster, right? Big. Now, the reason I'm taking these names is because these firms, not only are they large from a point of view that they have a presence in their own respective countries, but they actually have a presence, they have offices in multiple places in the world, right? So SOM has offices in Shanghai, they have offices in London, they have offices in multiple parts of the US. They have a New York office, they have a Chicago office. And so, so that also is a sort of a telltale sign of how large the firm is. I mean, if you're internationally positioning yourself in various countries, and if you're relocating yourself in various countries, it means that you have enough project inventory to be able to invest into something like that, where you have people dedicated for that entire zone. So HOK, for example, has a Hong Kong office where all their APAC projects kind of run out of there. They also have a Shanghai office, I think, or some office in China, but they have that's the scale to it. Whereas I think Zaha Hadid is limited to
mostly
one center, centered around Europe. So that's the differentiation, right? And so if you just need to understand what the scales are, it doesn't mean that Zaha Hadid doesn't do a project which is the same size as an SOM.
They do.
So that's also important. So this is the reason I'm saying this is because some firms have decided that they want to diversify and expand because they enjoy the phase of growth. Whereas some firms have consciously taken a decision that they're going to cap themselves up to a certain point and they don't want to grow beyond that because they're very happy doing the work that they're doing. So they're very happy. So Azadi, I think is, I don't know how many people they are, but they're very happy being one unit with, and they will probably do, certain select projects in the entire, but those projects by themselves will be, remarkable, right? So the BMW HQ, for example, the factory and office, if you've seen those images, I mean, that's another level of,
What my take on
detail and
this
scale. Yeah.
is, in the international space, we have brands like Zaha Hadid, Ben Van Berkel, UN Studio, Snoheta.
UN Studio.
So these kind of firms where they are known for the identity of the design that they do.
Yeah.
So it's, you look at a building, you know it's Zaha's building. You look at a building, you know it's Gary's building. But for the same scale of people in Indian context,
Yeah.
when we look at their work, we can never identify them as a large scale architectural firm doing unique projects. I don't know. I mean,
where
that
will you
could
put
be.
total environment in that case? Unka
See,
kya
total environment is a very unique thing where they are their own clients
Correct. They develop.
to some extent.
But I'll tell you this. So while we all know Total Environment as a developer, they do consult as architects for standalone projects as well. They've done offices for a few companies. They've done individual homes for people who are not a part of their their overall developer project portfolio. So it's not like they don't do it. But that is where I would probably give you that differentiation, saying Total Environment, or rather not Total Environment, Shibani and Kabul Architects is a great example of a firm that has a very strong design language. Total Environment is a recipient of that design language, because over the and a lot of this also comes from the fact that when they first started working on these projects, they realized that certain materials, certain details worked really well for them, and certain details just didn't work for them. So they made sure that they never went back to that material or that particular kind of detail ever again, right? And then over a period of time, they realized that that the wire cut brick worked for them, the concrete worked for them, the affiliation with terrace gardens and roof gardens was something that they were able to perfect over a period of time. So that's become a very integral part of their design language. And also from the other side, clients have started coming to them because they want that kind of work. So if I had to, so I would think that Shivani and Kamal Architects is a great example of a firm which is very similar to what you described. Internationally, if you look at Zahadid, or if you look at, of course, their styles of work are very different. But if you look at the kind of scale of work, and where a single firm, you look at the work and you know that, this belongs to them. So if you take a Coke bottle and you break it and you shatter it, no matter what happens, if today you find a small piece of glass over here and you pick it up, because of the mold and because of the shape of the bottle or whatever, you will look at it and say, "Hey, this is a Coke bottle ka glass." And so we used to talk about this as a when I was working under him. He used to talk about how our architecture should be something like that. So today, if you break down one of your buildings, and if someone finds a little brick, and the best example of this is Frank Lloyd Wright, right? If you break down a Frank Lloyd Wright building, okay, and you sort of take out all these little, if you sift out all the various pieces, no, you'll see a certain kind of brick which is very consistent with his work, or a certain motif that he did in the latter half of his career. He had these very typical motifs, or he had these little typical planters which are kind of almost like they were a three-dimensional version of his own logo. Of his own firm's logo. So he had these planter boxes that would hang over his boundary walls, right? So if you have all these, and I'm just giving you a random example, or even the stained glass windows that he would use. So if you break down these buildings and you actually start sifting them one by one, you will actually look at it and say, hey, this is a Frank Lloyd Wright building. And we used to say the same thing in when I was working with Kamal. He used to talk about having this kind of an identity, saying that this is what it is. The reason I'm saying this is because it's not bad to have this. It's actually excellent. But what it does is that typically this is something that you will see with a practice which is limited up to a certain size, and that's the size that you are referring to. So Azadi, in their practice as a whole, has this flair which is consistent through their work. Frank Gehry also has this certain flair which is consistent. So if you break down any of their buildings, you will always, so whether it's Total Environment, Frank Gehry or Zahadi, if you break down these buildings, tomorrow you will, depending on the kind of stainless steel piece that you take out, you will say, okay, Frank Gehry ka hai, or this is Zahadi, right? Or this is a Total Environment wire-cut brick, right? So that exists. But the moment you start diversifying into a larger scale in portfolio, that becomes really difficult. And for the simple reason is because every client is different. Every city, every state that you work in, every geography that you work in is different. The audience for whom you are designing, right? Whether, and in large scale projects, you're not usually designing for the end user directly. You're designing for the end user indirectly. So you're designing for a user group. So today, for example, if I'm going to design for if we're designing a housing colony in Singapore or even Japan, right? I mean, I'm just talking about something very different from what we are used to here. Between designing a housing property in Mumbai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, and say Tokyo, you will see 3 dramatic or 4 dramatically different requirements that will come out.
Mm-hmm.
It's got everything to do with the economics of the place that you're building in. Okay, Mumbai is space starved, right? Bangalore has a different view on what homes need to be like. Hyderabad is vastu centric. Tokyo is another it's another beast altogether, right? If you look at the kind of design, the design constraints that you're going to be dealing with. So now, if you're going to start diversifying and becoming a practice which is global, right? You have 2 ways to look at it. Either you start doing only those projects where your design language can be impressed upon, or there's a smaller subset or a smaller audience that will subscribe to you, albeit across the world. Or you flip the equation around and you make yourself as flexible as possible, saying no matter who you are, I will be able to design for you and meet your requirement. Of course, you should be able to pay my fees and you should be able to, the economics needs to work out for me. But as a design ideology, the first threshold of whether you will like the kind of work I do or not, that's crossed very quickly, because we will find you a solution where we will meet your aesthetic, but we'll also make sure that our design sensibilities are not lost. And that actually brings me to what we do as Edifice. The move from T to Edifice was a dramatically different change. It was a huge, it was a massive difference. And it's funny I'm saying this because both are large companies. Both companies have a very good working culture, extremely creative in their own ways, and yet so different. Right? Total Environment was all about being there's a certain design framework that we were working with. So no matter what we would do, we would always have this lovely design language I was going through, very finicky about details. When I came to Edifice, the first thing that somebody told me was that, listen, we don't have a design language. And the ex-TE guy in me had a knee-jerk reaction saying, hey, how does that work? Right? And I don't think that went down very well with the people I said this to, but what the learning that I had in the years after that followed was that when you're in a firm like Edifice, the second problem that I told you about is that we are willing to work in every geography. We are willing to put ourselves out there and design for the world, right? And that means that audience number 1 versus 2 versus 3, all 3 of you will have completely different requirements. You will have completely different worldviews, right? So if you're designing for someone in Hyderabad, you have a completely different worldview, and your everything from your economics to the way you eat your food is different.
Actually, direction of the bed changes depending.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't mirror units in Hyderabad. You have to sort of maintain the same sort of orientation because they're so vastu focused, right? And the same thing comes with designing in Bombay or designing in Delhi. Within Delhi, if you're designing in Gurgaon and you're designing in the center of Delhi, 2 diametrically opposite requirements that come to you, right? So Edifice is one of those examples where we've got, as a large practice, we realized that firstly, there were various different avenues that we wanted to take part in. The second is that in each of those avenues, every single client is very different. Also, a lot of these clients come back and tell you that, listen, I saw what you did there. I really like it, but I don't want that. Right? I want you to give me something very different. And I think 9 out of our 10 clients actually come and tell us that. I didn't believe it when they first said this to me. But as I started working in the company and I started going through various, opportunities, one project at a time, we realized that, every client actually comes and says, listen, I saw what you did here. I saw what you did in, this project here. It's amazing, but I don't want it. Right. So I want you to give me the same, I want the same level of intensity. I want you to create the same, iconic building, but I want something very different that nobody else has. And that is why I've come to you. Right. So that's kind of become our war cry, saying that, look, you don't worry about what you like and what I like and all that. You come to us and we will design a great product for you. For us, it's more about, whether you will preserve the integrity of what we design. We're purely design consultants. We don't do anything else. We are classic architecture and interior design firm, which means that we will not, muddle ourselves with a contractor or a vendor. We don't get into all of that. It's very simple. We follow the textbook as far as what an architect ought to be. Right. The only other thing that gets in the way of that is your fees. Right. So you have to make sure that we charge the right fee for the right time. Make sure that you are, that you are invoicing at the right time, finishing your work on time, and making sure that you're, delivering each milestone at the right time. And at the end of it, while you're doing all of that and making sure that the machine is well oiled and working very well, efficiently, you finally have to give the client what they need, right? And they've come to you for a certain requirement, and you have to meet that requirement, right? So two very different schools of thought, but literally circling back, and it all comes down to the same thing, right? You want to make your client happy. You want to make sure that your customer gets the best,
that's consistent
and
across.
that is consistent across. It's just two different routes to the same.
In a large format scale like this, how do you ensure that creativity is coming out? And because everything is time bound, everything is process oriented.
I think it's probably one of the most pertinent questions of our time. In a small firm, and this is a slightly roundabout answer. In a small firm, what happens is that the principal architect is the key author of design, which means that what he says, if he says turn left, you turn left. He says you turn right, you turn right, right? And it makes sense because it's a smaller practice. You don't have too many experienced people. So, and also because the work is smaller, everyone's trying to make a name for themselves, and so you identify the work with that individual who's right at who's at the helm of things. Now that approach can only get you so far as you start scaling up. I think one of the most successful examples of that, if you look at what we've achieved as Edifice as a company, the reason we're able to scale up to the extent that we are is because we did two things. Firstly, we identified that there are these different avenues that we want to work in, and we divided those avenues into verticals. So today, Edifice has 7 different verticals. Each vertical is dedicated to a particular category of architecture or interior design. So, for example, we have a developer vertical, okay, which is one of our largest verticals. And the entire group of people within that, it's almost like a mini firm within one vertical dedicated to developer projects of all kinds.
That's like that has a vertical head.
It has, and so that vertical has a vertical head who also looks into not only looks into the design flair of that department or the design consistency or the quality of design, but he also looks into the P&L of that department.
Interesting. I've never heard this bit before. P&L control or just keep a tab?
No, complete control. Because see, finally what happens is that if you can only do good work if you're profitable. And that's of course a much larger conversation that we will have now. But to come back to where this is going, you have so we've got developer spaces, we've got corporate architecture, which is a vertical that specializes only in built to suit campuses, right? So we've got a whole bunch of clients for whom now over the last 36 years, now Edifice is 36 years old. So in the last 36 years, we've done a whole range of built to suit campuses. In fact, we're doing one for someone in Bangalore as we speak, where the campuses range anywhere from say 5 to 10 lakh square feet all the way up to maybe even 20, 30 lakh square feet, right? And we're talking about large scale industrialists, IT companies, etc. So they are wired to looking at what companies require both from a master planning level and then from an architecture level. And then the next vertical that comes after that is the corporate interior vertical, which is a group of specialists that work only on corporate interior projects, which means that they only work on interior design. Most of the projects that they work on are usually where company has gone and leased out a space at a developer's, one of these tech parks, right? So, and you've got a floor plate of anything between 30,000, 50,000, 70,000, and you've bought multiple floors maybe, right? But you've got a warm shell and you've got an empty space. And as a company, you have a certain requirement. So this group is trained to, understand what companies need and then design for them, from start to finish, right? So similarly, we also have a hospitality vertical. We have a healthcare vertical. We've got an education vertical, and the last one is science and technology, right?
Science and technology.
Yeah, which is something that where we specialize in labs, different kinds of
factories and stuff.
So they're not competing with each other.
They're not
Each one of them are business verticals.
Each of them are separate business centers, right? And so what happens there is that the reason we did this is because this is the long drawn answer of, how did we make sure that we were designing the best products in the largest scale possible? The first thing we did was we put the right subject matter experts in the right group. So if you're designing hotels, then you're only going to design hotels, and you're only going to design, spaces which are akin to what a hotel may have. So in the interior front, that would also include high end, clubhouses, luxury clubhouses, or even different kinds of high end restaurants, if if the economics of it works out, right? So they are trained to handle everything that comes inside a hotel, whatever be the situation. So whether it's a 3-star hotel, a 5-star hotel, whatever it may be, right? So the reason that works is because, one, it builds consistency, right? There are certain things between 3 projects, or between, say, across a range of, say, 10 hotels, one can identify at least 50% of the things that they do are very similar to each other. So the constant rigor of, going through your design process is made easy by that little bit of standardization. Okay. Sure. And it's standardizing on all the invisible things that you do. Right. And this is not something that I'm of course, Edifice is an example of it, but any large scale firm will do this. Right. So they know exactly what proportion the building needs to be, what kind of services that they need. You also know what kind of space is required. So if you're doing a 100-room hotel, what's the proportionate, back of house space that you require? What's the proportionate lobby space that you require? So you're able to come up everything from the area program right down to, what all a space requires. That familiarity allows you to be faster.
True.
So what that does is that now that you've conquered that part of it, the bulk of your energy goes into making sure that the project is unique. Because there's certain things that you can standardize. There's certain things you can't standardize. I can't standardize your business requirement because your business requirement is different from yours. Yeah. I can't standardize geography. Yeah. In the same city, I can have a slope site, I can have a flat site, I can have a site which has like in Bangalore, we have Raja Kalways running through our sites, right? That's just what it is. Now, I can't standardize a solution for it. I have to find a built-to-suit solution for this, this little creek that's running through my site, right? Each site is oriented differently, depending on which geography you're in, your rainfall, your weather, your hot, cold, everything is different. So those you can't standardize. But what you can do is you can ease the process by understanding what repeats itself 100 times over, conquer that, make that your toolkit, and then venture into your designs, into designing your project. Because then what happens is you've won half the battle. The rest of your attention is going into making sure that you are understanding what your constraints are, and you're able to customize things where it really matters.
One is just a straight up point, like vertical heads, are they like CEOs of a?
So they're almost like so they're almost like that. So how we sort of, so if I had to just give you a sense of how we are as a company, so we've got the board of directors. Each of them have been erstwhile vertical heads, and they've all grown up. We of course have the founding directors of the company who started the company, and then you've got other co-directors with them who joined them in that boardroom as they grew up in the firm. And now it's a point where you've got these board of directors, and then we've got our vertical heads, and then we've got regional directors like myself who handle different aspects of our own operations, right? So the vertical heads are the subject matter specialists, and they also kind of handle the P&L for their verticals. And then we have someone like me, who is a regional head, who handles not only the P&L of the region, but also handle the operations for what happens in my region. So when I'm working with someone, when I'm working on a project here, so let's say I'm working on a developer project or any one of these verticals, right? or a hotel project. Then we've got a team of architects that are working out of the Bangalore space, a group of generalists who are working out of Bangalore in tandem with the subject matter experts who are sitting out of one of our other offices, or maybe usually, that's usually Bombay, right? So where we are headquartered in Bombay, so everyone sits out of there. But usually all our projects are a sort of a cross-functional team that comes together and starts designing it.
So it's not just vertical, it's also horizontal.
So there's a little bit of horizontal as well. And the reason that happens is because that's the only way in which you can understand region-specific requirements, client-specific requirements, right? So the verticals bring in subject matter expertise. The regions bring in regional expertise, right? We know our bylaws. We know what our client wants, because if you're working on a project in Bangalore, you're the one who's sitting here with him and talking to him and making sure that you understood his requirements. So, and therefore the person who's leading the project is usually someone who's sitting out of here, talking to them and making sure that they the client is managed well and the project is managed very well, right? So that's how we're integrated.
In college, I am only looking at a dreamy world that, okay, a design character identity is what defines me as an architect. So I want to work with somebody like Bijoy, somebody like Kiran Venkatesh, somebody like B.V. Doshi, where I go learn the technique and then start work on my own. But in a corporate firm like this, what's the career path I have, and what are the chances of me becoming the CEO and getting a seat on the board?
That is a question of two things, or rather a function of two things. One is, of course, your aptitude, right? So if you when we hire fresh grads, we obviously look at what kind of stuff that they're interested in. A lot of kids come with a clear ambition saying, I want to be a part of the hotel group. Okay, and I want to work on hotels, and that's why I'm coming to you. Somebody else comes and says, no, I want to work only on offices. I've worked in one or two other places, and I've done houses, I've done all that, but I want to work on large scale campuses, right? So a lot of kids come with a very clear ambition. A lot of kids are okay to be put into different kinds of verticals because they just want the exposure. But over time, you kind of realize what they're able to sort of bring to the table. And one of the things that I didn't mention to you, that when we hire young grads, we don't just hire them and then start making them go work on staircase details, which is how it some of us actually started our work. We hire at the junior level, and then you work on one detail. Or one of my friends worked on toilet details for the first 6 months of their entire working life, right? Just some hundreds of toilets, right? Somebody else worked only on staircases. So while that does still happen, because every project has a requirement, and you're fit into a project. But if a new grad comes in today, you have the opportunity in a firm like Edifice to actually have a seat at the table when the project is being conceptualized. Why? Because these projects are huge. They're massive. So one person can't sit and call the shots. Second, as you scale up on projects, you realize that a lot of the design decisions that you're taking are also data driven. So there is this very elaborate process of collecting data that is required for the project. So it could be site data, client data, user groups, conducting different kinds of surveys and trying to figure out what your user group requires. So there are companies for whom we've gone and conducted shadow study. Now, why do we do that? Because every company has a different workflow. So say you're designing for a company that's working on robotics. Okay, now they have a certain workflow, which is why they've organized their teams in a certain way. So you know that their teams are seated in a certain way. Their conference rooms are built in a certain way. They have labs which are associated with their workspace. So there's a certain distance that they want their labs to be in. So in order to do that, you actually go and walk through this entire space, understand what this firm is all about. How do they work? How many people do they have? How do they eat their meals? How do they conduct their meetings? And you actually do all of this. And then that is brought back onto this table, right? So as a young grad, you have the opportunity to get exposed to any of these little activities that are there when you're actually sitting down. And then what we actually do is we workshop the pre-concept stage. So before we start a concept, we actually get everybody to sit down and we workshop it together, saying, okay, look, this is what we have here. This is the site. This is the client. These are all the various attributes of this project. Now, let's go into an ideation mode and let's just bring as many ideas as we can to the table. And then what you see there is that you see this whole, this flurry of ideas that sort of come in from different directions. And the best ideas come from the most unexpected places. That is then, and so the seniors in the team, their job is no longer to sit and dictate, saying, मैं sketch करूँगा, तुम इसी के basis पे तुम बनाओगे. That's not the way it works anymore. So now it's because of the nature of the work, right? And we're talking about projects which are in lakhs of square feet, right? So that method also doesn't work anymore. So what happens is that everybody comes up with ideas and the seniors actually sit down and stitch those ideas together. And then depending on the various designations of people involved, there will be someone senior who reviews it. There will be someone from the director level who actually, oversees it and says, yeah, I like where this is going. There is someone from the client facing side who's sitting down and looking at it saying, look, I don't know if this is going to work for the client. So why don't we try a different approach? So you have to listen to all of these people. And then the team actually agrees to one aligned concept. And that is worked on and developed. Or maybe two such aligned concepts. Those are worked on. And then you kind of pick the best one. And then it's eventually presented to the client.
So
which is also very important.
So more specific to your role, when all of this is happening, because you're at a lead level, how do you manage to lead a team like this, still keeping the design integrity and the creativity in mind? And so how do you do that?
So my role is a little funny right now because I have now come into a point of becoming a generalist. From being, I used to be a specialist in my earlier role within Edifice. Now I'm a generalist, right? So I'm the guy who sits and faces the client. That's one. I don multiple hats, of course. So one of the hats that I don is the guy who faces the client. So depending on the kind of project, like for example, if it's a corporate interior project, it's not my subject matter expertise, right? So I try and rely on the subject matter experts. So I try and orchestrate it in such a way that the corporate interior team does their bit. And of course, the vertical head over there is someone who's this is his bread and butter. So they are able to come up with these ideas and sort of put the whole thing together. But where someone like me comes in that sort of a situation is not to be the guy who guides the design, but actually is the guy who sets the requirement and the framework very correctly. My job is not to design. My job is to actually make sure that I describe what the client needs, what the client wants, and what can the client afford. These are three things that I will tell you, right? And then I can back that information up with, what's the site like? Okay, what is the weather like in Bangalore today? Or what is it going to be? What's the climate study that we're looking at? Right? What are the various bylaws that you need in a city like this? Right? There are certain bylaws that we have to follow. Right? We have a very unique fire driveway requirement in Bangalore, right? Where your fire driveway has to abut the periphery of your building. Right? So those are things that me and my team in Bangalore will actually sit down and say, okay, this is the information that we're going to give you, and then they will start responding to it. And then, of course, and then my job becomes to, then the second part of my role is that once I give this and they start working on it, I come back and tell them whether they're okay with it, whether this may work, this may not work. Are there any red flags? And practice makes perfect. Eventually, you have this lovely product that comes out. Now, I told you what the starting point for a kid in
is. I'll just add on to that. One is the growth path, both vertical. And second is between verticals, what kind of freedom do I have to move after having worked 5-6 years and getting expertise in one vertical? If I want to move to another vertical, do I have the option?
That's a difficult question because it doesn't always work out like that. But has it happened? Of course it has. Sometimes it's just a question of we've got more projects coming in on one vertical and we just need all hands on deck, right? So and sometimes it's even got to do with the fact that so we recently created a new vertical. So that becomes an opportunity where you look at, so you scout around from within your existing pool saying, I need someone who's understood my system. I need someone who's understood the processes that we follow as a firm. And obviously we need someone who can represent the firm in that particular vertical, right? So that is when you look out for those little bright sparks. Of course, a lot of guys don't want to be, a lot of vertical heads will not want to let go of their people, right? It's a negotiation. But then eventually what happens is that when in such a case you find someone who's who you think will add most value to something like this, and then you move them into a vertical like this. So there are 2-3 cases why someone would move, right? Other than that, I think it seldom happens because most people don't want to move.
And
a lot of people are
growth?
The vertical growth is something that happens. It's a time related thing. If you're going to work for 1 year and expect to become a senior designer, that's not going to happen, right? And I'm talking about someone who's come in as a fresh grad. So you have to go, jump through those hoops and sort of, go through that rigor of becoming a master at your subject, and then eventually, that growth does happen. I mean, there are guys. I think the one thing that I can, where Edifice is it's a living, breathing testimony of the fact that people who have joined this firm as fresh architects have become directors in the firm, right? And that precedence has been set now for the last 25, 30 years at least, right? And that, I think, is a good sign of where someone can be. So if I have to answer that question, what is my growth path? Your growth path is currently infinite, right? But what you also need to realize is that, the growth feels great as you go from junior architect to architect to senior architect to chief designer or whatever, right? And then project head and then vertical head, right? That growth feels tremendous. But once you start nearing the top, you realize that there are only so many positions that you can fill. So the real question is what happens there, right? And that is where a firm that is constantly growing, you realize that there's this thing about vertical and horizontal growth. So the horizontal growth becomes very important there. So there it's not about jumping to the next. So as you start hitting a project head, vertical head, director level position, you're no longer thinking about growing to the next level. You're thinking about growing what you are doing as a business, as a practice, right? So a vertical head today is obviously everyone aspires to become a director at some point, but that aspiration is more like a result of the efforts that you are sort of putting in today. And what are those efforts for? To grow your end of the business. So today, my entire endeavor is to grow our operations in Bangalore as much as possible, right? I want us to grow. I want us to get better. I want us to be able to double our capability over the next couple of years. Now, depending on how that flares up, how that pans out, my growth story will result. The result will be in my growth story eventually, right?
Does the firm, I mean, not just Edifice, but generally, I mean, a large scale firm, would they have HR processes to identify? I mean, one is to identify how quickly a person is learning, whether they're being an asset or a liability to the firm. Because one of the things that we have been discussing is time is not a measure of someone being an asset to the firm. If somebody has been in the firm at a draftsman level for 5 years and has not done anything for the personal growth, but his or her salary is going on increasing.
Absolutely.
So whether I should retain them into the firm or let them go, but retain them on the virtue of having spent 5 years and they know how the system works. So how do these kind of calls get taken?
This is something that I think every architecture firm faces beyond a point, right? It's the same logic of aging out, except in a larger practice, the aging out happens not so much from a salary point of view, but happens more from a skill set and a value add point of view, right? You took an example of a draftsperson. This can happen to someone who can be an architect and not as skilled with their work as possible, right? So how do you solve that problem, right? Now, look at the dilemma that you're looking at. You have someone who's been working with you for 20 years, which means that he's been there through thick and thin. At the same time, you also have people who are, a lot of guys have been there just because they were able to ride through whatever was given to them. They were able to deliver. But beyond a point, they're pretty much doing the same thing that they were doing, say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, right? So it becomes extremely important to... So the first thing that one needs to start doing is to recognize, such individuals and try and figure out how to train them and, upskill them in whatever ways we can. There have been successful stories. There are people who've been in Edifice for about 20, 25 years. They started out as draftspersons, and they've ended up becoming some pretty senior designers in the design team, right? Why? Because they started out by just drawing drawings, but then they were, as with every project, they realized we realized that person's actually growing and is now adding more and more value, up to a point where that person was able to tell junior architects how this project needs to be designed, or how a drawing needs to be made, or how a detail needs to be put together. Usually the answer lies somewhere in the technicality of the work that we do. There are two sides to what we do. There's a creative side and there's a technical side. Some people are very quick to grasp the technical side of it. So while they may not be the most they may not be the greatest storytellers, when it comes down to resolving a detail, coordinating with your consultants and your vendors, and making sure that there is a designed solution to an existing problem, they're terrific at it. So it becomes very important for us to recognize those people and make sure that they are constantly pushed and upskilled into it. Ideally, you should make sure that nobody ever reaches a point where you have to even ask this question. The only way to solve it, the right way of solving this problem, is to make sure that you have a clear growth path for every single individual, and this is something that we are striving to do. In fact, doing that, we're doing a very elaborate exercise.
Beautiful structure around it, because they have consistent exams, who moves where. I mean, out of all those people who get in at an officer level, somebody who gets in at a JCO level can come to up to a certain mark.
Yeah.
He or she can retire as a colonel, but they'll never go beyond that. I think somebody who comes in at a major level can go up to the general level. But
the army is a great example. I think doctors, right? You can decide if you want to be a GP for the rest of your life, or if you want to get into a specialization and then you continue to grow in that aspect. The same logic applies here. Of course, it's a lot less technical compared to what a doctor goes through, or even what an army individual goes through. But the key thing is to always remember that, and this is something that we've now put into practice, right? So now on an annual basis, we look at the growth story of every single person as a part of their KRAs. And that becomes a method for us to actually look at how they have fared in the year that has gone by, and therefore what should they achieve in the next year, right? And this is where the whole system of KRAs or KPIs, which is a very corporate system which most architecture firms don't have. Okay, the larger architecture firms will have this. Right? So you talk to anybody from a large scale firm, they will tell you that we have annual KRAs. We sit down, we understand what the person did. There's an annual appraisal system that comes in. So you sit down with the person and say, okay, dude, you did really well today. Okay, and you did really well. You worked on these many projects. This is how well the projects did. This is how well your drawings did. And between last year and this year, this is the difference that you have been able to add to us as an organization, right? But you also need to then remind that person that, look, just because you've done excellent this year, doesn't mean it doesn't mean that you do the same thing again next year, right? Sometimes it's important to remember that what worked out for you as excellent this year becomes your new benchmark. Right? And then you need to be able to tell that person that in the next year, this is going to be the benchmark that your minimum benchmark that we are expecting out of you. Right? Or this is the minimum benchmark that you should expect out of yourself. Forget me expecting things out of you. Because now you've crossed that barrier. Right? And this is something that was drilled into us when we were starting out. So I think it's a fair sort of method. It allows you to constantly measure how much you're growing. The problem starts the real problem starts when you don't measure at regular intervals, and then you wait for 20 years and then you go back and say, oh, but you know what, you're doing the same thing that you were doing 10 years ago. So at some point, somebody's going to turn around and ask you, boss, if I've been doing the same thing for the last 10 years and if you think that I haven't been growing, then what were you doing?
Yeah.
Why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
Right? And that's a difficult question. That becomes an extremely awkward conversation. So coming back to how this question started, I think there are two ways to solve this problem. One, for existing cases where you have someone who is at the risk of becoming redundant, you have to upskill them, right? You have to upskill them, and you have to work, or you have to give them enough opportunity to upskill or add new value to the things that they're doing, right? Otherwise, they will become a burden on themselves, on your team, on your cost structure, all of that, and then letting go of that person is going to be should ideally be the last resort, which we usually don't do. The only other way to do it is to prevent this situation from happening altogether. You have to make sure that you are running your KRAs on time. We do it twice a year, where every 6 months we sit down saying, okay, look, so the KRAs are set annually, saying this is what you're going to do this year. And these are the goals that you need to achieve in this year. And then at 6 months, there's a checkpoint. So we just sit down with them and check in and saying, okay, let's see how you're doing. Okay, are we doing okay? Are you behind? Do you need to catch up on some of your goals? And sometimes not everybody sails through the year. Yeah, sometimes you have very complicated projects, and a lot of the work that you do is also a result of what the person at the other end of the table is accepting or rejecting. Right. So for a drafts person, for example, you can he could be doing his job perfectly well, but he could be having a horrid year because he has an extremely unreasonable person sitting at the other end of the table in the form of a client or a PMC or a contractor, right? So how do you measure success at that point in time? So you have to look at the context of things. You have to look at, how they're doing. So sometimes they may be doing the same thing again as what they were doing last year, but because it's a little more complicated this time around, they've added value to what you require.
Opportunity is a platform for one to be tested before you trust him with a certain responsibility.
Correct.
Right? Now, if there is upskilling happening, which means you are giving the fodder required for somebody to perform better, then the opportunity opens up for you to be able to put him through tests to see that upskill karwaya, knowledge base better hua hai. Is he performing to that? That's the test. If possible, then you take him up. That is literally creating a funnel for you to have your line of leaders ready. So your front and the bottom line, your once at the base also clear out. And it's like a filtration process. Ideally, in a boutique organization, I understand if your identity is built around a certain strong design or aesthetic sensibility. That may get stuck because even if you create a line of leaders, one may not be able to replace that offering from you for which people came to you. But for an organization that has gone to the mid segment, which means scale has been a factor of what you deliver, then shouldn't this funnel system ideally ensure mid-segment agar pahunch gaya firm, they should be able to look at growth and continuity than closure?
No, for sure. So, so that's the whole point, right? So looking at, the only way forward is growth, right? Unless, of course, we all decide, that, we don't want to grow anymore and we want to cap ourselves at a certain number. And we've taken that call in the past, right? I think
and that's a fair enough call, according to me.
So COVID taught us a whole lot of things. The recession taught us a whole lot of things where we decided that we want to cap ourselves till we strengthened ourselves up to a point and then we could grow again. But that's not the answer to your question. So I think somewhere where what we need to realize is that the only thing a company can do is set that process in place and hope that the funnel of leaders that they've put in are able to, spot talent in the right way and sort of nurture them to grow, right? And that's, of course, a cultural thing. So if the firm has a culture of letting people grow and working so that you become redundant, just so that by virtue of your team doing everything for you and being able to handle things by themselves, then you know that one of them is ready to take your spot, and that's how you go to the next, hop up to the next milestone, because there's somebody now who can take your place here, right? So that's a cultural thing which we're trying to emphasize. But you also have to remember that not everybody can fit that spot all the time. And that is always going to be a difficult conversation. So it could be in the form of someone who's not growing as prolifically as somebody else. So sometimes what happens is you have two grads who come in together. One grows very steadily, one grows astronomically. Okay. Some people just have that X factor. There's nothing you can do about it, right? And there's the third guy who's just not grown at all. For whatever reason, it a lot has to do with the person's aptitude. So now one can say that, okay, as a company, we have to make sure that we're able to look at everybody, look at all their strengths and weaknesses and move forward, which is something that we're actually doing. But at the end of it, you can take the horse to the water, you can't make it drink.
Yeah, sure.
That's,
I mean, upskilling
that's
is a process of,
upskilling is a process, and
you're not, and because opportunity a lot of times backfires because you haven't skilled the person enough to be able to handle an opportunity, especially somebody who's in the system.
And so, like I said, I think the intent is always to retain that person. The genuine intent is always to make sure that, look, our first line of approach is to figure out that, the moment we realize that someone's hitting this point, we say, okay, we need to work with this guy. So that is when a couple of us will actually sit down and start working with the guy, saying, okay, listen, this is what it is. We've observed certain things. I think it's high time you now start doing other things as well. Okay, you're doing really well. You're doing your job exactly the way it's supposed to be done. It's great. But now I need you to start bringing, adding more value to what you're doing. And so we start introducing him to newer aspects of the project that he wasn't previously handling or she wasn't previously handling. Newer aspects of, give additional responsibilities. So the other thing that we also do is that when you're working in a company like this and you have a large org structure, it's not always what he said. It's not always a vertical growth that also happens. So the other way for some of these guys to grow is to grow horizontally. Okay, and what does that mean? That means that you're a DAS person today, but you're also someone who handles, say, who's looking into the detail library of the firm, or you're someone who's looking into the post project study that happens. Okay, so there are a couple of guys who are given a responsibility, saying, okay, now while you are working on projects and you're making these drawings, one of the other responsibilities that we've given them is to go and study a project after it's done and tell me what went right, what went wrong, document that entire thing. Okay, so some guys become documentation experts. Some guys.
My growth in.
So I'm just giving you an example of how else one can. That's one example. There are several such examples. So the upskilling comes in not just from a point of view of trying to become the next senior designer or the next project head, but also from a point of view that, listen, you want to, maybe the guy will remain and be a senior drafts person for the next 5 years. Okay, but in those 5 years, his capability will become multifold. Okay, so and then eventually he may get that.
For me, it happened for a few years. I mean, I moved horizontally because from creatives it became engineering, and then it became projects, and then it became client service. I wasn't growing vertically at all because there was no way to grow vertical. But that became horizontal growth.
So what happens is you can grow horizontally, you can grow vertically, but sometimes in the course of hopping roles, you also grow this way. Because the moment you change your roles, you got a, sometimes it's a salary increase, sometimes it's a designation increase, because you realize that in the course of doing what you're doing, you developed another skill set, which you're now able to do better than other people. So there's also that, right? And this applies to everyone across the board.
The flip side of this, where you have, spent 5-6 years keeping somebody, upskilling them, a new firm comes, offers them a better job at a better salary.
That just happens. That happens. That's a reality.
At the end of the day, the skilling is only happening in a limited form.
Look, we live in a capitalist world here, which means that it's a free market for everybody, right? And that there is no answer to that. That is just something that everybody is at bears the risk of losing someone. Okay, your best guy can leave you after 10 years or 20 years, right? Because he got a better job offer somewhere. The saying is that people usually don't leave. People join jobs, but they leave bosses or they leave people.
Sometimes there's also the disappointment that, why that person got a better thing than I did.
Yeah, it is. And the larger your organization grows, the higher the chance of something like this happening. Because, like I said, there are very few spots to fill on that, as far as the hierarchy is concerned, right? As you go into the leadership, a company can't afford to have 200 leaders when they have only 500 people, right? You can have maybe 10% of that number can be the leadership, and then there's middle management, and then there's
that number doesn't.
And this has got nothing to do with architecture firms. I think this has to do with just
generally
across the board as to how a company is typically run, right? And so the risk of losing people to more money from another firm, that always exists.
So currently, I mean, we've been talking to a lot of people. But I've been talking to a lot of architects also. The general, in today's time, they're facing a lot of issues with the quality of the younger generation people coming and working. I've heard ridiculous reasons for them just leaving. Somebody who is 800 meters away coming by a scooter gives a reason saying that The travel time is too much, and it's too much. I'm not able to manage the travel time.
But I'll go to what he said for just a few seconds ago in some sense, that it's an open market. They too have options today.
No, it is, but
No, and so actually what I was trying to say is that the open market works, the free market works in both directions.
Yeah.
And so that is
Let's
something
talk
that
about
everybody. So just just bring more context to the conversation. What is the difference between a socialist market and a free market, right? The social market is where everybody shares the burden of everything that happens, right or wrong, together. So which means that the guy on the top, the senior most person to the junior most, everyone gets paid the same salary, the same thing, same everything. There is zero growth, right? There is harmony, yes. There is mutual respect. There is brotherhood. There's safety. There's security. But I think the downfalls can be can be plenty if not managed in the right way. We are fortunate that we live in a country that comes with a free market policy, right? So now in a free world, in a free market, you have to remember that if I have a right to hire who I want, my hiree has a right to join whoever they want. That fundamental decision cannot be changed, or that fundamental logic cannot be defied in a free market, no matter who you are, where you come from, whatever, right? You can influence people to join you, leave you, whatever. That's different. That's I'm not getting into that. But this is a reality, right? So now, and this is something that we will always have to gear up for. You can have, like I said, so the only thing that you can do at your end, try and make sure that your pay scales are all, at market level. Don't underpay. And I know that there's a lot of hypocrisy that comes with this, because architecture is known to be the field where people get paid lesser than, say so a 5-year experienced architect versus a 5-year experienced tech startup guy. There are huge differences between what the architect will get paid versus what that guy gets paid, and that's unfortunately a reality as a stream, right? As architecture as a field. Now that aside, if you just leave that aside for a second, what you can do is that as a large practice, you can make sure, most large practices do this, right? So I know we do it because we actually study what the market is like. We know what the market salaries are. We know what we are paying, where we are paying above average, where we are paying below average. So you need to know your market. You need to know what is acceptable for a designer level salary, a senior designer level salary. You need to know that. And so as long as you're able to, find that line of best fit, you're safe for the most part, right? And the way people leave you, people will join you also. That it works both ways. But the one thing so you can control this up to a certain point. How can you tilt the whole equation to your favor? Is by fostering a great work culture. That becomes a huge aspect of why a person leaves or joins a firm. I know a lot of people who've come in from another firm and come into the place that I work in simply because they found that other place to be just toxic. Okay, and it turns out that those guys were doing better than us, more money, whatever, but just completely toxic. So the candidate actually came us and joined us on a slightly lower salary. It wasn't dramatically lower, but like a 19-20 ka farak. But he or she was okay to come and join us and say, look, I'll give you guys a shot, because at this point, I just don't want to be there. Right? And then after coming here, over the last couple of months, when you talk to this person, the person comes back and says that, I really like the work culture here. Right? And this is so much better than what I was working on. So as of now, I know that this person is going to stick around for a while, and and hopefully if we can continue to keep the culture going the way we are, we'll at least at some level, I'm secure that this person will stick around and will grow with us. The third thing that I can do is the growth path. So there are three things. There's salary, there's office culture, and there's growth. Right? At any point in time, it's a tightrope balancing act between these three. If you can balance these three, some firms do it really well. Some firms, I don't know of anyone who does all three at the same time really well. Depending on the year, the month, the day, any one aspect tends to sort of tilt a little bit here and there. Some firms are able to keep the work culture aspect really well. The rest of it is always up. So the work culture is something that is very inherent to a place. The culture of how people treat each other, How does your boss treat you? How does your reporting manager treat you? How do you treat your peers? That is something that's inherent to a culture. And I think this is somewhere where I tip my hat to the founders of Edifice, because I mean, it starts from the top, right? And they've kept that going. And or actually, I've been pretty fortunate of working in both the places that I worked. I think work as a culture, both these organizations are very healthy organizations. The other two are always, they're going to keep fluctuating, right? Growth will keep fluctuating. You can't grow the same way every year. Your salary can't, there will be years when your salary increment will not be as nice as what you thought. Okay. And there will be there will be a year where you feel like, you're a little below the market. But then if your culture is great, you will have the space to go and talk about it and tell your bosses that, look, this is what it is. This is bothering me, and I need to relook at this. Right? And if they really value you, they will come back and tell you that, boss, okay, you know what? Hang on. We don't want to lose you. So let me do something about it. Right? And they find a way to kind of, work things around for you. But it finally comes down to the culture of the place, and whether you can talk to your superiors, whether you can, you have access to people that you can go talk to. So one of the other things, and I wrote it in my note to you, right? I don't know if you noticed the word that I use is, we're so, in today's world, we're so fascinated with being leaders in our own right, that we all want to be entrepreneurs. But what I would actually tell people is that, there is such a thing as intrapreneurship as well, which I don't think is spoken about enough in the world. And the best example I can give you is Sundar Pichai, right? Like, I mean, the man was a product owner, created his own vertical in Google. Chrome was his thing. And I mean, eventually he grew and became the CEO. But that journey of entrepreneurship is just incredible. And there are so many such stories. I think every single vertical I had in Edifice today is an example of just, high level entrepreneurship in our field. You'll find other examples in other fields and other companies. But that I just feel like that is something that's not given enough importance. And a lot of it also has to do with the grooming that we get when we're in college. Everyone tells us, by the time you leave college, everyone's always telling you, dude, you need to get out and start your own firm.
Yeah.
And then तुम जब pencil की line खींचोगे तो पूरी दुनिया उसको follow करेगी, right? Then you come to a large scale practice and you realize that that's not even true. It doesn't work like that. Right? So you have to, of course, people sketch, and of course, somebody will sketch and somebody will follow. Of course, that happens. But, and of course, you will grow to become, a leader in your own right. But it doesn't have to be a small little firm that you're running. It can be within a larger practice where, and today it's Edifice, tomorrow, somebody else could find the same space in another practice and do the same thing, as long as the scale of that firm allows you to do this. And I think it's changing now. Yeah. Right. And I think in some way or the other, especially from the engineering colleges, people are realizing that you can, yes, of course, startup culture is rampant, and, everyone wants to be their own boss, and, there's all of that. But somewhere, I think, at least from an architecture point of view, I think slowly with the, with the kind of scale of projects that, we're now doing in India, it's now coming to a point where slowly but surely you hear murmurs of something like this coming out of colleges. Where saying, listen, you don't have to go about and being, your own boss. They're very few though. I can think of maybe one or two handful of, academic people that I know who speak this language, but very, very few. But it's a start.
So you said a lot of, in a large format firm, a lot of things get standardized. There's a lot of data-driven stuff that happens. I am not sure if this is already happening across the world elsewhere, but AI definitely is taking over. How much of this do you see AI doing it in architectural firms?
I'm seeing that both in the case of interiors and architecture, AI is generating a ton, and there are people piggybacking on it as well. The inquiry that I want to make actually is, because he's practicing in a certain context. And of course, if there's a threat, it's kind of, it impacts everybody else, right? How does he see the whole flare up about AI being both beneficial and derogatory to architecture as a field and practicing architects?
I think there's a lot of hoo-ha about AI, right? And of course, there is this whole thing of, AI is going to take away our jobs, and there's this threat that looms in the air. Right, Judgment Day is coming. Everyone from James Cameron to to
Steven Spielberg. Yeah?
Steven Spielberg or whoever else. Even these guys are commenting on. No, I think James Cameron said something like, I told you this is happening or something like this, or maybe it's a meme, but people have, quoted a bunch of these guys saying, look, we've been seeing this as an inevitable threat, right? But I mean, leave all that social media frenzy aside. I think you have to understand that AI is an extremely highly advanced tool that is going to come. Okay, and it's already here, and it's only going to get better. So, like any other tool, I mean, it's like, once upon a time we had to build our own saw and cut logs of wood, and eventually we decided that you can build an electric saw, and then that electric saw allows you to cut more wood at the same amount of time. And today I don't need you to go and chop wood for me. I will just get I'll place the log into a machine, and that robot will slice it and dice it and put it together. And now with my CAD drawings, I can feed that in, and it'll program a complete intricate sort of pattern onto the board that I want, or it can chop it up into pieces. And our dear friend here does exactly that, right? And AI will only help him plan things and take things ahead and increase his production 20-fold. That's one way to look at it. The other thing is, I think AI will help you make a lot of decisions, right? The way we will progress as humans is that eventually what AI will do is that it'll, menial tasks will start becoming a part of, it will be what the robotic world will start taking over, right? Does that mean that our construction workers are in deep trouble? No. In fact, I just thought of an example, and I can't remember where it was. Where recently in one of these companies where they incorporated AI into some field of work, and they actually ended up hiring more people. Not because AI didn't simplify their jobs, but because they needed more people to run those AI programs and let the program do what it needed to do, while the human actually sort of observed and ensured that it was getting the result that it was supposed to get. So the difference is that you won't become a part of the process anymore, but you will become a part of the end result. The way I see AI working in this sort of a context is that it'll help you get your 3D renders come out much faster. Okay, just one example. Does that mean I don't need a 3D guy? No, I need a 3D guy to sit and work on that program and just make sure that it comes in. Why? Because I don't want my architect sitting and working on that AI product when I actually need him to sit down and think of those beautiful ideas and conceptualize that design, right? What AI will do is you'll be able to create, today if you're creating 1 or 2 or 3 concepts using CAD and Revit and all these other fancy softwares that we already have, tomorrow with AI you will probably create 30 of them. But there is no guarantee that 30 of those concepts will be acceptable to you. You will still need a human to sit down and sift through that muck and come back and say, this is the one that I like. Because finally, this is the concept that's going to end up in, that I'm going to implement for you because this meets your requirement, right? And this is exactly what happens in a lot of so I've been fiddling around with Meta AI in the recent past. I've been sitting and putting in random prompts because I want to design this hotel room in a certain way. And almost every time for the same prompt, it gives me a different result.
Yeah.
There is zero consistency in it, right? And of course, it's because it's a nascent system, and it'll get better. It'll get sharper. And the whole point of an AI-based system versus any other past technology that we've been used to is that this is learning, right? So today the prompts that you do will become a kind of a learning experience for the software, and the software learns and gets better at it. So 10 years or a year from now, if you use it consistently enough, the same device will give you results which are much sharper and more tuned to what you want, and therefore you will get your time spent in sifting through that muck will reduce significantly. Does that take away from the fact that you're not going to be an architect anymore? No, it's not. It just means that you have better tools and you have more options in your hand, and sure, it's gonna do away with. I mean, there will be certain redundancies that it'll get rid of. But what it also and therefore what and time will tell. But at some point, some groups of people may have to upskill. Okay, but they don't need to go and upskill and become like, if you're a carpenter today, you don't have to go and upskill and become a product designer. That's not what we're saying. The role of the carpenter will change. It will become something else. Like the role of a mechanic today is very different from a mechanic 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So when you were working on a Fiat,
Royal
a premier,
Enfield
a premier Padmini, if you were sitting under the hood of a premier Padmini and wiring stuff, you compare that with what the mechanics do today. Today, even your regular mechanic, he still exists. You still go to him because you don't want to pay for your actual servicing. Once you cross your third or fourth service of your car, you don't want to go back to the main brand because the main brand, charges you an arm and a leg, right? So what do? You find this one guy who's really good near your house, okay, has all the tech. He's so he's the same old classic mechanic who's upgraded, right? So now the thing to ask is how many such guys have upgraded, right? If there were a pool of say 10,000 mechanics, did all 10,000 become as advanced as this guy? Or was it only a select few who were able to find the right opportunities? And so out of 10,000, 1,000 went, 1,000 became specialists, 9,000 became redundant and had to find other jobs. That I don't know. I don't have an answer for that.
Siddharth just gave us a career growth path for AI.
Then just open Instagram. Every time there are props saying that AI kar lo nahi to hamara zindagi chanda. That's what it's saying, right?
I think there's a lot more noise about it. There is a reality to it. Sure. We're reading about Amazon laying off people. They just laid off 6,000 people or 600 people the other day. Somebody else is, Meta's, streamlining their efforts, right? But that's also because they're getting AI to sort of build a lot of the software development that people were doing and is now being done by the AI software that they put together. But it's a difficult question to answer. But I don't know.
Somewhere at the back of my head, I'm thinking of Total Recall and Mad Max.
That is, I have a different analogy to that. That is what I equate to driving through Belendur or something like that.
From some data point last year when we did an open Google this thing, there are more than 50,000 architects that graduate every year in this country, right? And with the stories that we hear and on the gram and on everything, there are a lot of solopreneurs in architecture. There is a lot happening as well.
There's a very large number of freelancers.
Yeah. What does, not in the context of AI, but what does the terrain in the future look like?
I also want to add on to that same thing in continuation to that. I think you've already outlined a lot of things on what a large format architectural firm looks like in Indian context.
Yeah.
I'm not sure of what the numbers are. Maybe I think a firm like Edifice, which is a large firm with about 250, 300 architects, we have a handful of them. There's Venkatraman, there is Hafiz Contractor, there's Morphogenesis. Yeah. There'll be maybe another 10, 15 more of that scale. There's DSP. But these compared to an international firm like we discussed, Zaha Hadid has the same number or probably more. Or Norman Foster has more. Snoheta is also a much larger firm. And bigger firms like SOM and HOK and Fox and Fowl who have at least 600, 700 architects. And Gensler, which has, I think, close to about 6,000. That's what Shaju mentioned. 6,000 architects working with them.
Who? Sorry, who's
Gensler. Worldwide.
Worldwide, yeah.
Worldwide, not in an Indian context. But it's a single firm.
I'm glad I clarified that. I heard 6,000.
No, but it's a single firm.
The rails.
So, do we see that kind of a potential in the Indian context for the architectural practice? And if yes, what's the future that we have?
Again, this is a very time will tell sort of a thing, but here's what it's looking like right now. You've got, until 20 years ago, we didn't have any practices that were doing the scale of work that we're doing today. Today in Bangalore alone, I'm doing, my team and I, and along with the support of the guys and, my vertical heads in Bombay, we're doing about 10 million square feet odd in Bangalore alone. Okay. We couldn't have done that 20 years ago. Why? Because we just didn't have the skill sets for it. We started with 1,000 square feet, then 10,000, and then 1 lakh square feet and then 10 lakh square feet. I mean, that's where. And now
there's also aligned to the industry opening up.
a lot of it. Exactly. So I was just coming to that. So there's one is us becoming
Good.
that, and then, but the industry opening up is always first, because you're not going to wake up one day and say, okay, I'm going to design a 1 million square feet project, right? The industry needs to be able to give you, the real estate market needs to be able to give you that kind of a project for you to even attempt that. So the first thing that happens is the industry grows. Today we're at a point where the industry has grown, and now consistently, I mean, if you look at the amount of construction that we're doing as a country, it's the numbers are staggering, right? So we are at an all-time high, and it's only going to get, it's only going to increase steadily as the years go by. But now you now have a pool of architecture firms in India that have worked on this kind of a scale. So does that mean that you're going to see more work out of them, and you're not going to see so many international architects come into the fray? I don't know. A lot of the projects that we're doing, when I say we, I'm talking about across architects on the belt. It's usually a combination of maybe an international firm coming in, giving, and creating the initial master plan or the initial concept for it, and the regional firm actually takes it up from a overall project delivery point of view, right? Where you completely design it and detail it, and let me tell you, it's a lot of work, right? And so so a lot of these firms now have been doing this for a while, and we're all now well aware of what our delivery capabilities are.
Yes.
So the question really comes down to that gets asked is that, can we create the same level of concepts that the international architects can create? The answer is yes and no. Why? Yes, in the case of certain typologies of buildings which are which come by easily. I always feel that when it comes to an office block, we can probably create the same. We can do the same level of detail, or we can create a concept which is as good as, say, any of the international firms can create. But there are certain kinds of buildings which are very different. So, for example, airports are something that not many Indian firms specialize in, right? There are other typologies of buildings in different geographical locations which need an expertise because someone has worked on a resort in the snow-capped mountains of Switzerland, and therefore they are better suited to design something in north of Uttarakhand, just because they know how to deal with that terrain. I'm just giving a very random example, right? So there will always be these pockets of work that will require an international architect to come in. But the real reason why this happens is not because of capability, but it's also because a lot of projects are investor driven. A lot of cases you also have, you have a situation where the investors are willing to put in their money because they've seen an international name associated with it. It also allows them in turn to sell the project out to better, lease it out to other recipients, right? A lot of international firms who are setting up shop in India like the fact that while they have a perfectly clear understanding of how good we are in our work, and they're perfectly clear about how good Indian practices are, a lot of them like the fact that there is a firm closer to home that is designing the concept for this building, because then they know that there is a certain design standard that they can accept out of it. And it hurts, yes, but that's just the reality of it, right? I don't think that's going to go away very soon. The only way to kind of to manage this situation is just get better at what you do. And over time, you'll realize that there are enough people who will come to you because you're really good at this, and you've dealt with enough of this kind of scale, or you've dealt with this kind of an opportunity, right? And also there is also the tech side of things. What kind of tech do you use? Today, luckily, a lot of Indian firms are as tech savvy as a lot of the firms. We're all getting into 3D printing. We're all getting into different kinds of software related advancements. Everyone is looking at AI very seriously. We may not be putting it into practice, but I know that there's a lot of meddling that's going on in the industry. Different people are trying things with. So you've got softwares like Midjourney, and you've got all the other softwares where, at least from a 3D rendering capability, people are doing things. A lot of people are getting into generative design, right, which is allowing them to scale up faster because they're able to do more work in a lesser amount of time. So as long as these things are happening, and we as firms are building our capability, at some point you will be able to give the international firms a run for their money. But they all come with their own USPs, right? And I think the other way to look at this is okay, them coming into our country is one thing. What about us going out to other countries? Right? Why aren't we thinking about that? Right? I think that's a big question that we need to start asking. I think at some point we spoke about how there are a few firms in India that have actually started doing projects abroad.
Yeah.
Right.
The scale is too small. They have.
It's a
but
start.
Yeah.
Right. It's a start, and I think we will start looking at that.
One of our guests has also put up design studios abroad. It's a double-edged sword because one is he's big, good enough to go there, and also he knows that there's this social baggage wherein you feel that Firanka hai, matlab, this.
Yeah. I know it also comes from the fact that you are now able to, I guess where one has to now understand what the gap in which country is, right? So, if, for example, I think for an Indian architect, it makes a lot of sense to look at Southeast Asia as a market, right, or the Middle East as a market. Of course, the Middle East is always enamored by what the European architects do in terms of the kind of projects. So, if you look at the Line or you look at any of the other extremely ambitious projects, they all have someone coming in from either the US or Europe and designing it, right? They've got some firm ground there, but there are so many other avenues that haven't been explored as well. Africa, for example, there's a slow but steady market improvement that you're going to see over a few years, hopefully, right? As long as, I don't know what their political scene is like, but there are opportunities coming up there. Southeast Asia, okay, a lot of opportunities there, or even Central Asia, like we're talking about Vietnam, Cambodia, all these other places, who, by the way, have some really lovely firms coming out of them. If you see some of the work that's coming out of Vietnam and Cambodia, the small scale ones, they're incredible. So there are these opportunities that are going to come about.
Right.
So between India and Thailand and maybe Sri Lanka, you will see a lot of exports, where a lot of firms are going out and putting themselves out there in different countries. China's already there, but yeah. So that's the way forward. The other way forward is also, I think, and this is something we spoke about, where I feel like India is a very inward-looking country, and that's a tough pill to swallow, simply because when you're sitting inside any of our developments, everything is amazing, right? Because we've managed to get our designs and our construction capability up to a point where we can now design the best spaces. But unfortunately, we're always limited to whatever's within those four walls. I think the way forward for us is to start figuring out how we can let that design value translate into our urban landscape. That is going to be a big challenge for us. I think I think the biggest challenge is to make our cities look better, make them more livable. If someone asks me saying, what is the one big challenge that we see as architects, that we see in our future as a country, I think it would be to make our cities more livable. That's a ticking time bomb for us. And and we as architects need to solve it. There's nobody else who's going to do it for us. We're the ones who are qualified to solve that problem, right? Architects and urban designers. So let's see.
The way we read about an international firm like a Snoheta, Gehry, Zaha, why are Indian firms not being spoken about and put out there and made more aware of the work that we're doing? Maybe we see a few.
Well, I just think that it's because we're the newest lot of architects in the global scenario. So wind the clock back 30 years ago, how many Indian architects did you know about? Exactly.
Very few.
I mean, and wind the clock back another 30 years before that, the only two architects that you can think of who actually went out there and made a mark for themselves, Mushkil se Charles Correa.
Charles Correa,
right? Charles Correa is the only one, and B.V. Doshi. But Charles Correa was probably possibly the only Indian architect for the longest time to go and have a project in the US.
Yeah. And he used to teach in MIT.
He used to teach in MIT, and which probably helped him, bag that project and take it there. I don't know the story, but
the other way around, it's always been there.
But look at it from that point of view, right? Whereas today, if you look at the kind of, we're finally at a place where we can brag about having over I think, I don't even know the number of architects that we have in this country. I think it's well over, if I remember last checking a few years ago, it was sitting at some 10 lakh plus firms. And I could be...
There is this firms.
Just firms. I don't even know how many more such individuals there are, right? And
each firm would have.
That's a big number. That's a pretty big number to start with, and we're also churning out more architects every year. I mean, our batch of architects, if you remember the number of kids that we had in school then versus the number of kids that you see coming out of architecture firms today is phenomenal.
Almost 3 times.
Right? And we came from a generation where the moment you said you want to be an architect, everyone looked at you with a,
Are you
are you mad? Like why would you do that? Why would you ruin your life? Like people actually ask me that question. So anyway, so there is going to be a shift and it's going to take time. Having said that, we are getting recognized at the World Architecture Festival. We are getting recognized globally on, various publications. So that's a start. I mean, you have, and all the names that we took, by the way, a lot of them are getting recognized for doing work that is possible only in India, because you can't do it. Some of these projects you can't do anywhere else because of the cultural, whatever fabric that we have. And there are so many, and then eventually, once you start seeing our guys do work in other countries, I think then it becomes more of a quantity issue. Quality wise, I think we're there.
I don't know. I mean, I don't get to read so much or see so much about Indian architects as much as I see about foreign architects. But maybe we need to have a lot more platforms where they can put across their work.
I would think so.
People speak about them, write about them, and have shows about their work.
So we do. I mean, we are. I think as a country, the number of publications that now talk about architecture. I mean, right from the as something as prolific as say AD versus architecture plus architecture and A plus D. All these other. I mean, and then now you have Arc Daily, which wasn't there when we were growing up. Arc Daily came just.
Apart from that, there's a ton of.
There's a whole ton of it, right? I'm just saying that there's so many other. The digital world has taken off. I mean, I've lost count of the number of online publications there are. But even in terms of print or even in terms of forums where people can go and talk, I mean, there is a dramatic increase to it. Some of us don't probably venture into it because we don't see an audience that is suited to us. Right. So for example, someone who's working on high-end homes, for them, they see value in getting published in an AD or any equivalent space, because their audience is reading that material, and their customer base comes from there. For us, it's something else, and for somebody else, it's from somewhere else. But to answer your question, there is an improvement. If you start looking at, just go through the list of World Architecture Festival nominations. Yes, it's lesser. Right, but if you compare it in comparison with what you used to get back in 2000, you'll see a dramatic increase, and it'll take time. It'll get there. I mean, we will come to a point where we will, you'll start seeing more of that. I think that the key is to the shift will come when you start seeing more Indian firms designing projects abroad, maybe even in Europe and in the US. I think that will be the big shift, because a lot of these giant publications that we talk about are centered around the US and Europe. So the moment you start seeing publications coming in. Let me give you another example. Until Big became famous, did any of us think of too many Danish firms? I mean, we could maybe think of one or two. Rem Koolhaas, yeah, but
he was.
He's an outlier, right? And Rem Koolhaas also because high tech was his thing, and he had this whole different style that resonated with so many else from other parts of the world. But he's literally the only other Danish architect that I could think of until I started reading about Big and that's the work that they were doing, right? And I'm talking about something as far back as 2008, 2009, when I was graduating from college. So now since then, how many other Danish architects have you heard of? Maybe one more, right? That doesn't mean that Denmark is not producing architects. It just means that, a lot of them are very content with where they are, and, they're happy living their lovely Danish lives. But at the same time, I think a lot of them are probably not putting themselves out there. A lot of our guys are not putting themselves out there internationally, and I think that's going to change. Because I'm seeing a couple of firms that I follow now, I've realized that they've started, applying for work outside. Okay, they've started receiving RFPs from different international client bases. It'll take time.
A favorite building anywhere in the world of yours?
Oh,
that's not designed by you.
That's a good one. My favorite is actually it's the Roby House.
Roby House.
It's the Roby House, and so it's within the University of Chicago campus, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, and it was designed at a time when there was nothing around the house. It was just open prairie land. It is till date one of the most well preserved Frank Lloyd Wright buildings that you can ever go to. I saw it for the first time in 2010, and I was right in the middle of my journey with Total Environment, and I knew how obsessed we were as a firm with Frank Lloyd Wright, and so when I went there, there were so many little details that I sort of went through, which I could completely relate to, because we were designing things very similarly. Whether it's the concrete coping detail that he would do over his brick walls. So all his brick walls he would use these long format bricks, which are almost like a foot long, okay, and 50 thin, which we now get as wire cut bricks in Bangalore and in India.
Customized sizes.
Yeah, you get those sizes now. So he would use these big, and he also, a lot of his walls were not load bearing. So he would clad those bricks like a composite masonry and, sort of work with that. And then he would have this, the typical RCC coping that you have, which is like a double slope coping that you would do right on top of your brick wall, on your compound wall, just so that water doesn't get into it. Those kind of details, the kind of pointing that he would do, or even the way he plans his journey. So the house, you don't enter right from the front. You have like this little roundabout way to get behind the house, and then you kind of get into this little passageway, which is small because apparently the family themselves were short people. And he's done something very similar in another project called the Mayo May House. So you kind of walk through this, and then slowly, after a point, you walk through this little narrow foyer, and then you come into the main living room, and it just opens up. And the moment it opens up, you have this entire window line view of the entire land in the front, right? And it's a great experience. And he also worked with something called the engine of the house, which is like this little. So he had all his heating and fireplace and all that, kind of clustered into this little block in the center of the house, so that all his spaces could get the required heating or the required cooling that was required. And that eventually became a thing for electricals and things like that. He was one of the first guys to do concealed wiring.
In 1930s,
1910. 1910. So Roby House was made in 1908. It went from 1908 to 1910. So it's one of my... And the reason I picked this one is because I've been there. And it's amazing what, if you walk into that space, you can believe that somebody can actually live there even today. That is, I think, the hallmark of a beautiful piece of design. If you can use it for the rest of eternity. Of course, they've put in a lot of effort. They've also restored it, and So one of the coolest things is that you get to, so they replaced one entire wall of bricks. Or the pieces that they removed, they actually package them and they sell them as souvenirs.
Oh.
So I have a little piece of brick that is that was from one of Frank Lloyd Wright's actual sort of projects.
One of the following who inspire your creative thinking, an artist, anyone?
So this is for me, it's a musical artist. So I have three. I have three very creative geniuses that I love to listen to. I have Pink Floyd, of course. There's Dream Theater. And I don't know if you guys listen to Tool.
Yeah.
Who?
Tool.
Yeah. A lot of, I mean, people who listen to metal will know what Tool is all about, but my God, those guys know how to make music. I mean, and if you listen, so they came up with an album in 2021, and if you just, it's called Fear Inoculum. Okay, so there are a couple of songs out of that album which are music which is actually designed.
I will listen to that.
Yeah.
Any architect?
Any architect who inspires? I think big. I think and it of course starts with Björk Ingels, but it's only fair to say that there are others who work with him who are extremely creative, and I find that firm and their approach to design. I mean, I haven't seen anyone else like them.
A non-creative person who inspires your creativity.
Who inspires my creativity? Non-creative person. So actually, I'll tell you who I find extremely inspiring. I find Satya Nadella very inspiring. He's not known for his creativity, but if you read the story about how he turned Microsoft's fortunes around, post Steve Ballmer exiting, and if you read about what Satya Nadella has done and how he, sort of orchestrated their entire business strategy, whether it's, looking at the enterprise module or, all these other various aspects of their work, I think it's, and then take them into a point where they're one of the most profitable companies today in the world. So, yeah.
Okay, last question. Any international firm that you would love to work with even now?
Oh, big.
Big?
Yeah. Maybe Ando.
For me, it is UN Studio. Ben Burkle.
I'll probably say, okay, since I've already said big,
Yeah.
so I'll probably say Tadao Ando. That is another one. I mean, I don't think I take his name enough.
Cool. I think we will wrap it up here. Thank you so much for finding time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
This
This has been very exciting.
It was brilliant. I mean, I loved it.
If you enjoy what you hear and see, do give us a like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.